igama lami ngu-Amanda Zuma. Lesi ke isiqephu sesihlanu.
Welcome once again to Artfluencing Democracy Dialogues in partnership with the South African State Theatre, and my name is Bahle Kwela.
I-Hector Peterson Memorial Museum eseSoweto iyisikhumbuzo sesibindi sentsha yango-1976 eyalwisana nohulumeni wobandlululo. 1976 uprising yaqala eSoweto, yasabalala eNingizimu Afrika yonke, yashintsha indlela umphakathi waseNingizimu Afrika obuka ngayo ipolitiki. Ezaholela kwi-1976 uprising zadalwa isenzo sikahulumeni wobandlululo sokubeka iBantu Education Act yango-1953. Ukubeka kwezilimi i-Afrikaans nesiNgisi njengezilimi zokuxhumana esikoleni kwadala ukuthi intsha yaseNingizimu Afrika emnyama iqoqane ilwisane nalo mthetho. Ukudlondlobala kwe-Black Consciousness Movement kanye nokuqalwa kwe-South African Student Organisation kwagqugquzelwa ulwazi lwezepolitiki kubafundi abaningi, kanti abanye abafundi baqala bazibandakanya kakhulu nokungahambisani nobandlululo.
The South African Student Organization, or what is commonly known as, or was commonly known as SASO, it was a union. And of course, many wouldn't know that part. They think no, it's just an organization. In fact, it was a union. It was a union that was responding to the challenges that Black students in universities were facing. You know, challenges of racism, marginalization, and how they were ostracized from the rest of the university communities across South Africa. And remember that there was a union that was responsible for championing the injustices of Black people. However, the problem with the NUSAS, or the National Union of South African African Students, was that it was championed by white students, right? Liberal white students, who were sympathizing and also, in a way, empathizing with Black students. But this made Steve Biko, right, who was also a student in our university, in medical school, to start questioning the idea of existentialism, Black existentialism. What does it mean to be Black at a university? What does it mean to be Black in South Africa under apartheid? But also, what does it mean to be Black and have someone else who is white, similar to your enemy, right? Venting out your challenges, your lived experiences. And for Bigo, that never made any sense. And he said, no, we need to find an organization that will actually be a mouthpiece for Black students, where they'll be able to speak their own lived experiences. And Steve Biko was then elected to become the president of the South African Student Organization, which was actually formed in one of the universities, the former University of the North, right? Which is now in Polokwane. And yeah, so in as much as this was a multi-racial institution, but I mean the University of Natal, Black students particularly, they were the ones who actually went to Polokwane to elect Steve Biko as president, and those white students were left behind in the NUSAS. So that was one angle of SASO. But also SASO was responding to a space, a gap that had been created when most of our liberators were incarcerated, were imprisoned, others they were in exile, others in underground. So someone had to fill in the vacuum, fill in the gap. But of course, there are those who argue and say, no, history and nature doesn't allow in a vacuum, right? So SASO was inevitably going to be established, right? So the need for SASO was unavoidable, right? We needed an organization that was going to champion Black students' grievances inside the universities of higher learning during apartheid. And they were also going to respond to the broader problems, societal problems that were facing Black people in general. And that's why it even led to the formation of an umbrella organization of some sort, right? The Black People's Convention, which is sometimes called the BPC, right? Which accommodated adults, right? So this SASO later on became what we now know as SASCO. Black consciousness movement, it is a philosophy. It is a philosophy that Steve Biko subscribed to and made it into a movement. So you have Black consciousness, right? Where you self-actualize, self-realize, and you are aware of yourself and your identity and what it means to be Black, either Black in the sense that this is the color that has been imposed to Black people as that which means anything that is anti-white. So if you don't have privileges, right? So you're Black. If you don't have economy in your hands, you are Black. If you don't own the land, you are Black, right? So it was also responding to that level of thinking that has made Black people to accept the condition and the status quo and what it is, that we are Black and we are in this dire situation and there's no one that is going to help us. So we need to change our attitude. We need to change our mind. We need to change our consciousness of who we are, right? So this movement was responding to that call to say, how do we change? How do we rewire the minds of Black people? But also the other angle of Black consciousness, it was for those who embrace the Blackness, right? It's either you consider yourself Black as the universe, the ever expanding, galaxies of this planet or this universe, this whole establishment, or do you see yourself as Black as coal, that you give this power, this energy, or you are Black because you are Afrocentric, you are channeled towards everything that is African. So you need to be conscious of that, and you need to move that and channel that so that it brings some form of strength and power and purpose. So it was a response. So this movement would embrace anything that recognizes Blackness and also is able to deal with the psyche of a Black man, right? And the Black consciousness movement, founded by Bigo, because this one, it was his baby. He actually formed Iloki Black Consciousness. It was, in a way, trying to look at how the white liberals were failing to assist Black people. And Bigo actually uses this, right, from the experience that he got when he went to one of the conferences that was hosted in Rhodes. And Bigo noticed that whilst they were mixed, there were white students, liberal students, who were sympathizing and empathizing with the Black people, but they didn't challenge the Group Areas Act. They didn't challenge the idea of separate locations, separate residences, and so forth. So Black people were accommodated elsewhere in Rhodes University, and also white people were allocated elsewhere. But the students that came from the University of Natal just accepted the status quo, and Bigo said, no, this doesn't make any sense, right? So this idea of Blackness, right, of Blackness is still platonic, right, to white people. So they don't want to touch it. right? Yes, we can do it at a distance, but we don't want to be part with you. And therefore, Black consciousness, again, Steve Biko, it was a way of living. He saw any element of racism and how Black consciousness was going to respond to that situation, to that atrocity or whatever unfortunate circumstance that a Black person actually experienced. So for him, Black consciousness was there to articulate the struggles that were experienced by Black people. And he wanted Black people to be conscious of them, who they are, of themselves, and embrace it and be proud of who they are. And that's it. Now, the second question, where you say, is it still relevant in the 21st century or in 2022? I think to say Black consciousness is not relevant is to say oxygen is no longer relevant in our existence. So Black consciousness will continue to be relevant. If you have institutions of higher learning, such as Stellenbosch, where a white student can pee on a Black student's belongings, that tells you something, right? So you need Black consciousness movement to respond to that, because that incident spoke to the conditions, it spoke to the politics, right? It spoke to the social milieu in the University of Stellenbosch, that Black students are still given this subhuman status. They are considered inferior. They can be done anyhow. They are still slaves if you employ the slave and master simile. So you have this idea permeating in institutions of higher learning, where people are supposed to be civilized, educated, and sophisticated and diplomatic. But you find that they continue to be savages. They continue to act barbaric. And this is not it's twofold. One can say it's not a color thing. It is the state of the mental attitude. Like Steve Biko would say, that's Blackness, it is the state of mental attitude, right? It is not a matter of pigmentation, but it is the state of mental attitude. But we cannot divorce the fact that most white people who are racist happen to be white. And that makes racism to be white. You then have what Bigo also calls the non-whites, right? These are Black people who behave white, but they're locked and enslaved under this Black skin. If according to them, they will actually negate the very thing that defines who they are. Because if they enter any circles of white people, they are Black. Then after maybe talking for a few minutes and they're listened to, only then they can be said to be non-whites or not too Black, right? Or the so-called coconuts, right? So it is still relevant. Black people need to be conscious, not only about the challenges that they are facing, but also to take pride of who they are and where they live. Not all problems are caused by white people, but other problems we cause them ourselves. Take, for instance, the taxi industry. There's no white person there, but we continue to kill each other because there's no Black consciousness. I don't see the next person as my brother who's actually trying to fend for his family, but I see an enemy, someone that I can, abuse, someone that I can kill, So Black consciousness, it is very much relevant, very much alive, and most importantly, urgently needed in this time.
Teboho Kobedi. And I mean, I'm pretty sure that we all know historically, what June 16 is about. But I think in the greater scheme of things, when I think about June 16 in 2022 today, where the generation is so different now, it's a different way of thinking. Whenever I think about it, I think we need to go back and remember what it took to get our freedom firstly, and what we need to do to make sure that we're not abusing the freedom that the youth of 1976 fought so hard for. And then again, and just continue, because we've received the baton from them, right? But obviously things are very different now, so we just need to restructure ourselves, our thinking, so that the freedom that we got, we can continue running with it as we're supposed to.
With June 16, I know that the generation back then stood for a purpose. During 1976, many lives were lost, of course, but the major factor about June 16 is that Black activists, Black students wanted change. They wanted transformation. But because for the longest time during their generation, they didn't get the attention that they wanted, so they decided to take it upon themselves to defy the system by taking it to the streets, fighting against a system which oppressed us academically as Black people, a system which oppressed us in so many ways. But the major factor which I know about June 16 is the fact that the youth back then, they got tired. And when somebody gets tired, they become rebellious according to those standing across them. So I wouldn't say they were rebellious, they were revolutionaries. They wanted change, they wanted to transform the education system. And still today, our education system is not really transformed like that.
My name is Edman Mpumelelo Mahlangu, and what I know about June 16 is that it's a day where the youth of 1976 took a stand and were striking against doing subjects in Afrikaans that would be Afrikaans in Afrikaans, English in Afrikaans, maths in Afrikaans. So yeah, they were striking against that, and they needed the system to change.
Ngomhla 16 June ngo-1976, abafundi abangaphezu kwezinkulungwane ezintathu baqoqana beqoqa i-Actions Committee ye-South African Student Movement besekwa i-Black Consciousness Movement.
Le mashi yabafundi kwakuhlelwe ukuthi iphelele Orlando Stadium. Kepha endleleni abafundi bahlangabezwa amaphoyisa ayehlome eyizingovolo. Amaphoyisa abesedubula ebhekise kubafundi. Konke lokhu kwaholela ekuthenini kuvuka abafundi bevukela ukubusa kahulumeni wobandlululo. Le mbhikisho eyaqala eSoweto yasabalala izwe lonke yaqhubeka kwaze kwaba unyaka olandelayo.
Izibhelu zango-1976 zaba nomthelela ongemuhle kahle kuhulumeni wobandlululo. Izithombe zazikhombisa amaphoyisa edubula abafundi ababekhombisa ukungabi naludlame zasabalala umhlaba wonke. Umhlaba wakusuyijikela eNingizimu Afrika ngoba lezi zithombe zazikhombisa ukuthi uhulumeni wobandlululo unonyaka ngakanani.
Mhla ziyi-10 kuNdasa ngo-2021, izinhlamvu ezintathu ezazibhekiswe kubafundi ababebhikisha zadubula zabulala ilunga lomphakathi uMthokozisi Ntumba owayeneminyaka engama-35. uNtumba wayephuma endaweni kadokotela ehamba kuDipier Street eJohannesburg. Ukubulawa kaNtumba kwasabalalisa imbhikisho yabafundi eyathatha amaviki. Kwaholela ekutheni kube nokwabizwa ngeFeesmas Fall 2.0.
I think I'll shy away from the word protest, right? And think more of revolution and reformation, which is something that I think is quite lacking in our country. We can protest. I mean, us in here in the studio now, we can decide, let's go protest about this, about that, right? But the problem is within the thinking, and we need to develop infrastructures, thought-wise, of how to do things differently. Because like I said with the previous question, the generation before us, they were protesting because that's what made sense. That's retaliation in that manner made sense for them. But now it's a completely different era, completely new generation. So we need to restructure, because we protest because we want change, right? But we need to think, what structures can we put in society as young people that will affect and bring about change? So yeah, that's it.
My opinions are endless. They're countless. I've been part of the student protest before, and I think they should not stop. They should not be halted, because student protests have not only produced sound views from the ground, but they have made society at large to be aware of certain factors that they never knew of. So coming from a university where student activism has been a tool for change, I believe that student protests have actually changed so many things in university. When it comes to outstanding tuition fees, the system never allowed students to come back to the system because they still had to pay. But through protests, there was inclusivity of the students who were coming from poor backgrounds. Through protests, students who couldn't afford accommodation were accommodated. And through protests, students who were not afforded a second chance to write their exams due to problems such as mental health, losing family members, there was transformation. So student protests is about change, is about representation, and it is about inclusivity and equality.
I am for protests. I'm not sure what's the right English word to use for it, is that when people strike, then they become violent. And then other things get added onto the initial strike. So then it becomes chaotic and violent. So that I'm not for. I'm not sure if there's a way, though, to control all of that, because, people actually see an opportunity whenever there's a strike. But then I just feel like sometimes it just derails from the initiative of what the strike was for, and then it just becomes all chaotic. But personally, I am for the strikes, because I just sometimes feel like that's the only way that people are heard.
Umculo, umdanso, izinkondlo, itheater kanye nefilimu zasetshenziswa ukukhombisa izigameko zango-1976. Zaziphinde zisetshenziswe ukukhombisa isibindi sentsha yangalesiya sikhathi. Sekuvele izinkampani eziningi zetheater eziqalwa intsha eSouth Africa. Lezi zinkampani zigqugquzela intsha yaseNingizimu Afrika ukuthi zakhe izwe elingcono.
The Fees Must Fall movement started at Wits University, and it was prefigured by the Roads Must Fall. The decolonization of the University of Cape Town was symbolized by the removal of the statue of colonial imperialist Cecil Rhodes.
The production DET Boys High by Small Indaba and Phyllis Klotz is based on true events. This award-winning play interrogates pertinent educational issues, which are still of relevance. The production uses traditional and urban songs, exploring corruption among teachers and the disillusionment of learners, the lost generation of students who since 1976 have turned to crime as a way of life. Roads Must Fall and Fees Must Fall were seen to be similar in the way that they addressed apartheid structures existing in education. Structures such as colonial statues and black exclusion via excessive fees. These two campaigns have consequently become known as the Must Fall movement.
The Must Fall reveal connections between South Africa's democratic presence and its apartheid past. As a result, these became focal points in South Africa's political sphere. South Africa's universities, their colonial monuments and financial barriers became focal prisms in which apartheid afterlives were refracted.
With the way it's presented of late, it doesn't seem relevant, but it's actually a good example of how in South Africa, young people have made the biggest difference and have made meaningful change. And there's still a huge gap and still a need for young people to make the loudest noise and to make the biggest difference and contribution. You'll find that it's young people who are speaking about things that really, really do matter take for instance, the quality of our education through fees must fall. Even it's young people on the streets protesting when there's service delivery issues. It's young people who are strong enough and courageous enough to go and fight for change or ask for change and keep our leaders accountable in the country. And that's what the young people of June 16 did during that time. So it's still very relevant in this country. There's still a need for young people. And you can see with how dangerous the political space becomes when young people don't speak out and when young people don't contribute. You'll find that many young people shy from politics in this day and age. Politics has been vilified for some reason. It's been vilified. It's for those who want to enrich themselves, whereas it's a means to make a difference and a means to run the country in accordance to what the people want and are saying. So you'll find that things become dangerous. Old people, you'll find like the ruling party, for instance, it has a lot of old people with old ideas. There's a need for change and there's a need for accountability. So that's why it's still relevant. The story is still relevant because it teaches young people that they can still be the champions of what the country needs today. Fees Must Fall has brought many difficult and important conversations in the country. Conversations about really what, how can I put this? The reality and the truth of young people every day, of young people, students in particular, struggling with debt, struggling with exclusion, struggling with not finding jobs and being excluded from the economy. It's also brought conversations about the truth that we come from backgrounds that are poor, that the country is struggling, really. It's brought conversations about the conversations about white people and Black people and where we are. So Fees Must Fall, firstly, has brought a lot of conversation to the forefront for people to have, for the country to have as well. I think that as well as Fees Must Fall has inspired a lot of youth activism. Like I've said before, that young people shy away from politics and activism, and politics and activism is often vilified, so they shy away from it. But Fees Must Fall has inspired many young people to come to the forefront, even to their own demise, I think sometimes. But it's inspired young people to take up arms as well. I also think that it has set a foundation for future generations to have something to refer to. Of course, not everything during 2016 was sorted out, not even everything. I think that unfortunately, unfortunately, things didn't happen the way we would have hoped that they happened. But I think that in the future, more young people will take up arms and will, I don't want to say arms because it sounds violent, but will fight or stand up for what's right. So yeah, it's inspired, it's brought conversation, and it's also inspired many other people to use their platforms to speak about the things that young people go through in South Africa. Fees Must Fall really outlined it very plainly, that we want free, quality, decolonized education. And obviously there are debates about what free looks like, but there are measures in place to make sure that free education is effective. And I mean, there are lots of arguments and people come up with different things about how, and if it's free, anyone is going to have it. People are going to take advantage of education and so forth. And those things don't matter in hindsight. And there is nothing that is put in place without its policies, without its rules, and without its requirements. So firstly, we'd like to see free education where South Africans have access to education, and it's not for a few people, and it's not for elite people, and also an education that doesn't make you come out of school already in debt. There are many students who go into the workplace with their internship salaries with huge amounts of debt while still needing to take care of their families and take care of themselves. Everyone wants to do better, buy a car, plan ahead, have a family, and so forth. And many young people are unable to do that because of the debt they have from varsity. And then we want to see quality education, education that has a place in society, not to come out of school with a degree that doesn't mean anything. So it must be quality education that can get you a job. And that's very important. And you'll find that there are many unemployed graduates because of that. The quality is just not up to par. And then decolonized education. We want an education that is not Eurocentric, and an education that doesn't teach on the basis of our oppressors. I mean, it's mind-blowing that we can have an education that doesn't speak to the reality of South Africa, and that doesn't speak to who we are, and doesn't teach us about ourselves so that we pride ourselves. I think many of the things that go wrong in our country come from the fact that our education in itself speaks nothing to who we are and our reality. And in actual fact, it's quite offensive that we wouldn't take many scholars and teachers who are from Africa, who've worked hard and have beat the odds, and not have their teachings and not teach about them as well. So I think that's what we'd like to see, free education that is quality and that is decolonized.
The more momentum the Must Fall movement gained, the more its members were hospitalized, killed, arrested, and kept under surveillance. Following a major Fees Must Fall protest outside South Africa's parliament in November 2015, 6 students were threatened with charges of treason, the Belleville Six. They were detained overnight and eventually charged with public violence and trespassing. 6 months later, the charges were withdrawn. As the statue of imperialist Cecil Rhodes was dismantled at the University of Cape Town, 8 students wrote The Fall, charting the experiences as activists who brought down a statue and then grappled with decolonizing what was left standing in its wake. The legacies of race, class, gender, history, and power 24 years after the official end of apartheid. Political and deeply personal, vibrating with song, dance, and the energy of youth.
Supporting us in our first step to decolonization.
They were at the front, disrupting the space, occupying it, speaking their mind. Finally, black students at UCT felt confident enough to talk about the traumas that we have faced on this campus.
Listen,
You must understand now when we are angry, because we can no longer breathe in this space.
It's not just about the statue.
We all know you colors have always had it better.
Now there he sits.
Hi, my name is Fahim Stellenboom and I'm the marketing manager at the Baxter Theatre Centre in Cape Town. Why are productions like The Fall still relevant today? I think it's perfectly clear that when productions, and particularly productions by young people dealing with issues of state, of what's going on in the country at the time, when these kinds of productions speak truth to power, they stay, they linger, and they're around with us for a long time. It is fundamental that as young people, where they see the ills of the world and they see what's wrong in the world, whether it's politically, economically, or socially, when these things are observed and it affects everyday people, the role of the artist is that to reflect what goes on in society. And therefore young people are in a very, very good position to be able to do so. The Fall will always be relevant because there will always be, in this country, until such time that education is free until such times that we get beyond issues like gender-based violence and all sorts of other issues that exist in this country. Those are just a few. As we know, there are myriads of issues, but young people at least have that energy, they have that passion, and they have that will to change the world, and therefore we need to make sure that we I think it's vital that government supports and encourages and puts into place systems and various projects that will enable and empower the youth. The youth, it's an old cliche, but they are our future. So we need to be able to empower them at a young enough age so that they are able to lead when being called on. I think if one looks at the state of the country at the moment, I'm afraid it's unfortunately, in my opinion, a mess. And there are no young guns within the existing government that we have at the moment. And that is sad, because what about the next generation who's taking over from them? It is very, very important that government at least put money where their mouth is when it comes to the development of youth, when it comes to the care and the looking after of youth. There are so many different social ills that exist within our infrastructure, within communities, within family structures in this country, and therefore any additional support and projects and initiatives and funding that government is able to contribute towards that will go a long way to secure a better youth for the future by the time it's their time to lead and to take charge of various positions of the country, as artists of I think that performance spaces and theatres and venues and various spaces really can do more to accommodate the younger or youth narrative by encouragement, by creating available spaces for works to be done, by supporting these works and supporting these artists and helping them through, but not only supporting them, in other words, not only giving them money, but also giving them the mentorship that is required. I think it is so necessary for us to not only put our money behind a project that involves young people, but also that we get involved with it, that we look how it grows, we see how it develops, that it becomes a seed, that becomes a plant that will grow into a fully fledged tree. That is nature, and therefore, as a society, we need to do the same. And theatre spaces, I can't speak for other theatres, but I'm certainly very proud that the Baxter Theatre is certainly one venue and space that encourages a lot of that. We have our Masambi Theatre, for example, at the Baxter, which is a theatre that is dedicated to young artists who have perhaps finished school before they hit the mainstream, that they're able to try out work and sort of see what it's like in a smaller venue at a much lower rental.
Directed by Isma Muhammad, the Centre for Creative Arts, located at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, has proven itself as a pioneer in supporting and promoting the youth in the arts.
The Centre for Creative Arts at the University of KwaZulu-Natal is essentially the community engagement wing of the School of the Arts. We have direct access to young people before they enter the university, during the time that they are at university, and also when they graduate. For us, the engagement with young people is vital in that it allows us to be able to establish relationships with people who are going to be a future generation of professionals and young leaders who are going to be able to take the reins of transformation in their hands. For me, one of the most burning questions around youth in our country is that if it wasn't for the youth of the 1976 generation, who made such a valuable and a powerful impact on the political landscape of our country, which should have meant that we should be a country and a government that is constantly working towards giving young people a better future, a better life, a better promise. And while that is said a great deal in political manifestos, it still leaves a great deal to be desired and to be seen as being implemented.
Okay, thank you.
From the recent tragedy that took place in the Eastern Cape with young people losing their lives, it's quite clear that we need to have a rethink around the way we engage young people in our communities, and particularly over weekends and during school holidays when they become most vulnerable. This means that there needs to be a strategy between local governments, between community organizations, and between institutions to join hands and to be able to find meaningful ways to be able to create programs for young people that are engaging, that are creative, that are inspiring, and allow them to want to make a contribution to their own communities as well.
Kulonyaka, i-Center for Creative Arts ihlomulise u-Ethan Mangera nge-inaugural Artfluence Youth Activism Award. uMangera ungumqondisi we-youth program i-Ahmed Katandra Foundation. Le ndondo ihlonyuliswa abantu abangaphansi kweminyaka engama-35 abanegalelo ekuthuthukiseni inhlalo nobulungiswa. Lo muntu kuye kumele abe isishoshovu esikhuthele futhi esinegalelo emphakathini.
Hi, my name is Irfan Mangera, Youth Activism Program Manager at the Ahmed Katandra Foundation. Being presented the Youth Activism Award at the Artfluence Festival 2022 has meant a lot to me. On a personal level, it has motivated me to continue the fight for justice, for equality, fairness within our society today that is plagued by so much that's going wrong. But it comes at a time where South Africa's democracy has matured to a point where we as the people need to be grappling with what needs to change and what must be renewed to invigorate a spirit of people-centered politics, of a politics that's one of care and one of compassion. And I think this award really has motivated me to do the hard work in order to build a base of young people who are ready to take forward that baton, to take forward that responsibility for change. I'm very grateful and honored and humbled that I was the inaugural recipient, but equally so, I think the award should be in recognition of every young person who continues to strive today, despite the challenges, despite the crisis of unemployment, of poverty and inequality that makes life so much more difficult to bear, that has an impact on our mental health, on our physical health, and our well-being, on how systems operate, on how our education and healthcare impacts on our lives, and the failures thereof. So I'm very hopeful with this. I'm invigorated by the recognition, but I think the award truly belongs to the young people at the Katandra Foundation Youth Program and all the people who continue to contribute to my life in shaping me in being the activist that I am, to truly serve the needs of the people before my self-interest. So I'm hopeful and thankful that this has come at this time. In a time when young people are not recognized, are not respected, are not honored enough, I think we need to enable a space where we support more young people in pursuit of a better life for all. Youth development companies provide the space, provide the skills, the comfort, the environment necessary for young people to thrive and to learn and to develop themselves to their full potential. I have seen phenomenal work being done in communities around this country where young people organize and develop themselves through NGOs, NPOs, and their own startups. But often, in fact, 90% of the time, young people are not supported. They don't have the capital to sustain this type of work. They don't have the mentorship to sustain this. And I think herein provides an opportunity in which society, by and large, starts recognizing this gap and supports this gap deliberately and without too much of a red tape that makes it difficult for young people to access. Youth development companies provide skills, allow for informal and formal learning, knowledge production. It allows for us to express or give young people a safe space to express themselves, in which they can grow and inadvertently so allow their communities to benefit and their families to benefit and society to benefit, because it truly takes a village to raise a child, and these organizations provide that hub and that space for young people to flourish, but also to get involved. You're seeing less and less young people taking to the polls, participate in democratic systems as a result of distrust, as a result of not being recognized enough. And I think if we do the hard work to support these organizations, to support young people, we will be able to see a significant shift in their contributions, their participation, and their development ultimately, which speaks to the future of our country and of our world, and a future that is very youthful by and large, a future that is one that encompasses multiple layers of society, all thriving and all bound by each other through the social fabric that we create. So this is why youth development organizations need your support, need the support of not just government, but the private sector. And not just at a surface level, but to truly give young people the space in which they can truly create a world that they design, not one that we inherit with all the crises that we're currently faced with.
The South African State Theatre plays a vital part in producing platforms that support young people's narratives in the arts alongside its cultural programming. Legislated as a cultural institution in terms of the Cultural Institutions Act No. 119 of 1998, the theatre CEO, Dr. Sibongiseni Mkhize, along with artistic director Aubrey Segabi, established youth programming as fundamental to the celebration and development of South African performance arts industry.
Well, we as a state theatre have always believed that young people have a role to play, not only artistically, but also politically, socially, and economically. So through our youth programs, we find a way of ensuring that young people have a voice and express their views, their ambitions, their concerns with regard to the shape of the country. And it's for that reason that we've got our Youth Expressions program, where we give a platform to young people to express themselves and also to apply their innovation in as far as their vision of the country. And as you are all aware, the youth of South Africa have played a very crucial role in bringing the change or the changes that we see in the country today, not only from 1976, but long before that. Young people have always been a force to reckon with in terms of taking this country to a direction of transformation and progress. The key thing is to make sure that we don't do things for youth without the youth. So we need to make sure that young people do play a crucial role in shaping the agenda of youth empowerment, transformation, and also, especially when it comes to artistic endeavors by young people, we need to give them space to do that rather than to have older people trying to interpret what young people are saying. I don't think they want anyone to interpret what they do. They want to do it themselves. So what we need to do, we need to support and also give that space for their creativity to thrive. Well, the burning question that I have is, are we doing enough to actually empower our young people to think positively about the future? I think if one looks at the tragedy that happened recently this past weekend in the Eastern Cape, it really leaves one with questions regarding, are we doing enough to actually guide our young people? Are we doing enough as people who have at least been exposed and have experienced some of the lives that these people, young people, are aspiring for, to actually assist them? But at the end of the day, what are we doing? Or do we even have enough places of arts, culture, and entertainment for our young people to be able to spend more of their time there than to go to taverns and places like that, which then resulted in that tragedy. So for me, it leaves us with the question is, do we have enough facilities for those young people to go and express themselves in whatever way?
I-Freedom the Musical umdlalo weshashalazi obhalwe ngumqondisi wezobuciko e-State Theatre ophinde abe ngumbhali osewine izindondo u-Aubrey Segabi. Lo mdlalo uxoxa udaba lukaPhindile odlalwa nguSimphiwe Ndlovu, oyisitudeni saseTshwane University of Technology ophinde abe ngumholi we-Fismas Fall Movement. Impilo kaPhindile ithatha inguquko engalindelekile emva kwesiteleka sabafundi esabe sise-Unions Building ePitoli. Lo mdlalo uyisitatimende sokukhombisa ukuzinikela nokunqoba kwakhe emva kwazo zonke izingqinamba abhekene nazo, ezibandakanya indlela okuqhutshwa ngayo izinto kuleli.
What you are doing here is nasty. We are going to hurt yourself and others. Innocent people are going to lose their lives. We don't want no trouble. Yeah. We don't want to stick to the system. We don't want no trouble. Yeah. We just want to bow to the master.
Captured in Silence is a drama about the traumatic disorders of a 16-year-old girl who faces betrayal from a grandmother who re-navigates her life for an exchange of groceries, money, and a promise to a better life. It is aimed at educating audiences about unpopular Zulu traditions. The piece skates on themes of dehumanization and loyalty.
Lengane ifuna ukuvuka uyazi ingane zanamhlanje ziyavilapha ngovila voco lizwi yelizwi yazi lamalanga ngima ukuthi ngimtshele into avele nje azibe sekungazi ukuthi yini inkinga yalo mntwana hawu lizwi yelizwi lizwi akizokubiza kangaka ngathi ngiyahlala yelizwi hayibo hayi ngimdala hawu awuzwele ubona le ngane uyabona umuntu wesifazane nganyama wonke khona la emhlabeni usho wakhe ngumshaneka awunange phela wonke umuntu ngumshaneka.
uThabiso Qwabe, i-curator ye-Youth Expressions Festival, uthi le festival iwumgubho wamaciko entsha akhumbula okwenzeka kudala ephinde ibuyekeze okwenzeka manje. Intsha yango-1976 yayinomdlandla wokwenza ushintsho iphikisane nendlela okwakwenziwa ngayo izinto. Lokho kusaqhutshwa yintsha nanamhlanje.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Thabiso Qwabe. Thank you for your time and the questions, which I think they are very relevant to the current situation that we're in. And well, I'll start with the first one. Let me just get into it. The first question says, do you think young narratives get enough recognition? For this one, I think I will say yes and no, because it depends where you're at. It depends which institution we're talking about. It also depends which area you live. I think the issue of young narratives is still an issue that we need to debate as creators and administrators, because the voice that they bring is quite important, because they really speak about relevant topics, relevant themes, and they're not in a space where they are, muffled by certain preconditions or their statuses in organizations or their statuses in community because they're young, they're free. They really talk about things that they want to talk about. So no, I don't think they all do, but like for the state theatre, there's programs, a lot of programs, even the ones that DSEC presents, like the incubator program, which really just focuses on young people and their voice. Even with the state theatre, the youth expression is currently happening now. So we don't even tell them what themes to talk about, but I believe that that space is there. But in certain areas, in certain communities, young people are not really supported in the way that they are because they're seen as rebellious or too upfront or too forward. Yeah, but I think it's something that as a country we're working on and we've actually recognized it and we're taking responsibility for it, and that also gives us a chance to actually address the issue. Okay, and the second issue, do you think government should be doing more to support young voices? Definitely. I think so. We can never do enough for young voices. I mean, all of us, even myself, to get to where I am, I was a young voice once, whether in administration or when I was a practicing artist or when I was a student.
Death of My Womb, directed and choreographed by Peter Human, follows 24-year-old Zandile on a journey from Kimberley to Johannesburg trying to find greener pastures, leaving behind a grandmother who, in trying to assist her to reach her goals, refers her to an old friend, Gogo Pumzile. Upon Zandile's arrival, Gogo Pumzile learns of her sexuality and resents her for it. She is determined to change her. Directed by Begum Kwane, the Begum Kwane Quartet offers a brief history and narration of South African jazz history through the medium of music. The quartet-style music ensemble and narrations aim at educating young people about the authenticity of their heritage.
I think performance spaces are there, but the problem is the education of the performing arts. There's a expectation or maybe a lack of misinformation that artists should entertain rather than educate through the medium of music. Performance spaces are often asked artists or musicians to entertain rather than to showcase their art. We have a lot of performance venues that are catering to musicians, but very few of them really, the true sense of the word, allow them to showcase their work, if I can say so. Some of the struggles include financial support, from the powers that be, and education of the arts. I think that financial support should go with an education for the arts because we've got so many talented brothers and sisters that are needing this kind of education in their field and competency in training. If the powers that be could have maybe come up with a program that identifies up and coming young musicians and fund them and really give them that space to grow, that would help with the struggle of musicians in becoming the musicians that they want to be. I think so. It is so vital. When we think about schools or when we think about our society, we think about survival and prioritizing things. We prioritize everything, from most important to least important, which would be, our health system, government, housing, and all of these things. So we educate our children like that, you prioritize according to the most important thing that you need. But the arts are always left to the last, which in my view is wrong because arts inspires innovation. Currently, we have a problem of unemployment in the country. I think the arts will inspire innovation and get people to think in a different way in this fourth industrial revolution as opposed to just thinking about survival. When you teach a child music or you teach a child fine art, not only are you equipping them with that skill, but you are teaching them innovation to problem solve from a young age? How can I solve problems from a young age? Rather than looking to a source of a ready-made method. Art and music teaches children to problem solve at a young age, and as they grow, they become entrepreneurs. They learn to solve more and more problems, and they come up with new ideas that will sustain them in the longer run. So this is why art is so important in schools, and music education is so important in schools. I think we are lacking in this thing.
Asset South Africa is an international network that advocates for every youth to have access in the arts. In 2015, the Asset World Congress was presented in the African continent for the very first time under the banner of Cradle of Creativity. Arts education activist Yvette Hardy was at the helm of this international network for many years.
Well, I think it goes back to what is the role of the arts in the lives of the youth, because, for me, some of the things that the arts do for us is, firstly, they give us a sense of our own identity and a space in which to explore that and to feel empowered within our own identities. They also give us the opportunity to explore the lives of others and to really engage with the society around us, with our own history, with the cultures and contexts in which we might be working. And they are also a space which require operation and cooperation and communication between people. So they're a space of building family, of building teams, of building relationships, of finding new ways of working together. And if you put all of those things together, then I think you see why the arts are so important for young people, which then takes us to why youth companies are so important within South Africa. Because youth companies are a space in which young people can direct their own destinies. Youth companies are a space where people can understand who they are, understand the relevance of their particular drive within the society. It gives them a space in which they can maybe make change happen, where they can change attitudes or perceptions, where they can change their own thinking, and where they can feel empowered, and where they also learn a lot of skills about project management, about development of self, development of others, and of course, cooperation and communication. So I think youth companies are incredible. They are the engines, if you like, of youth development. And we've seen so many incredible examples of that across the country, of young people who perhaps start in a youth organization while they're still at school. They get their training and they grow into the company, then they become more professional and they are taking their works to festivals. And within that space, they are really growing their identity and their sense of themselves as a citizen of this country. And just being here at the National Arts Festival, we are surrounded by companies that were basically started as youth companies and then matured as those involved with them matured. And very often those companies are the spaces where young people are finding their training, finding their feet in life, finding a sense of connection and of support in often very challenging situations. So I really believe that youth companies have to be supported because they are doing such important work. Well, I mean, I think like many other contexts, it's not just youth companies, but many other contexts within the arts, we know that there is a real crisis around funding right now, and that it has been very difficult for companies to access funding, and that it's also been very difficult for companies to not just access funding, but to access a kind of a continuous, sustainable cycle of growth. So often you'll find that a youth company may get a little bit of funding for a particular project and they put everything into that project. But once that project is over, there's nothing that they're able to build on. That it's kind of the project ends there. They don't get funding again for maybe a year or two. Many people leave the company. So there's a loss of skills, there's a loss of experience, there's a loss of knowledge. And so it feels like these companies are continuously starting again. Now, of course, this isn't true of every company, but I think that there are many companies that find themselves in the same situation. And often also, I think a key element which is missing is that young people, as they start to make a professional mark within the industry, don't necessarily know how to run an organization. And when you are running an organization, there's so many different elements to think about. It's not just about the projects that you're doing and the project management of those creative ideas, whatever they may be. It's also really about organizing people. So you need to have HR skills, you need to be able to organize money, and you need to be really responsible with money. So there's a lot of financial administration that comes into it. There's a lot of legislation that you need to be aware of as well. And because funding is tight, funders are really looking for those people who they can trust, who they can see are responsible with finances, and who have a good track record. And sometimes it's difficult for young companies to establish that good track record because they haven't had the opportunity to learn all the skills that they need. Sometimes they can make really fundamental mistakes, which will then put them in a bad light with funders and make it very difficult for them to continue to work. And so one of the things that we do within Association South Africa is, in fact, we provide support to organizations. So if an organization is just starting out, we will provide mentorship, we'll provide templates of how you can organize yourself, of how you can think about strategic planning, of how you can do a budget. If an organization is wanting to tour their work to schools, for example, we have a huge schools database that we can call on. We can help you by producing your tour, or we can work with you so that you produce your tour, but you do it with our support. Here in Makanda at the National Arts Festival, we are supporting 6 productions that are members of Asatej to market their shows to the audiences that are here, and to make sure that people know where they can find theatre aimed at children and young people while they're at the festival. So we are on the ground doing some monitoring and evaluation at every show, doing promotion of the shows, helping with putting things out on social media and through press releases, etc. So we really are providing a kind of a support that because organizations are poorly funded or unevenly funded, they don't always have access to themselves. So I think that we need to look at, there's not just one kind of gap. There are a number of different kinds of gaps. And what we try and do is, as a network organization, because we're working with some organizations that are really strong and others that are really struggling in different areas, to try and find relationships that can be supportive. And this has proved very successful in the past, and certainly it's something that we will continue to do. Well, I think that arts education is absolutely key to human development, because the arts combine all the different elements of what it is to be human. We talk about different forms of intelligence, whether it is visual intelligence, verbal intelligence, mathematical intelligence, literacy in terms of music, kinesthetic intelligence, our ability to move, to use space. All of these are addressed through the arts in one way or another. And every child naturally uses the arts to express themselves. So preschool, children are learning through artistic practice. When children play, they are using the arts. They are taking a block and turning it into a car. They are pretending to be their parents. They are singing a song to learn the days of the week or whatever it is. So in other words, they are naturally imbued with a leaning towards the arts. Then we get to school and suddenly the whole methodology changes. We're now expected to learn in a different way. And I think that arts education really is an ideal form of learning. It's very inclusive. It means that everybody, regardless of their background, has something to offer, because the arts are always about starting where you are as an individual. And so I think that arts education is fundamental, both as a subject in its own right, but also as a methodology. We would love to see maths being taught through the arts, science being taught through the arts, history being taught through the arts, because when you do that, you bring those subjects to life. And for a student that might be finding mathematics, for example, difficult, if they are strong kinesthetically, perhaps they can understand angles better by putting them into their body and dancing those angles than they might by sitting and just looking at them. And so, we really try and drive two threads in terms of arts education. This one is around the arts as a method for learning, and the other is about the arts for their own sake. Because we also believe that it's really important that, if you have a leaning towards music or towards dance or towards drama, that you're able to cultivate that talent and you're able to grow those skills. And you can only do that through practice and through engagement with skilled facilitators. So we are lucky in South Africa because we have creative arts as a compulsory subject for every child from grade R right through to grade 9. But what we don't always have are the teachers who are either skilled enough or enthusiastic enough or dedicated enough to want to teach that subject. And we've done a lot of work around encouraging artists who are interested in arts education to learn more about what is needed within the school curriculum and to be able to support creative arts teachers in the classroom. And through that kind of work, we have seen a big shift in how arts education is valued in the schools where our Kickstarter program is happening. But it's something which needs to really happen in every school, in every province in South Africa.
Kwi-Durban International Film Festival eyethulwa i-Centre for Creative Arts, i-Centre ibambisene ne-Nelson Mandela Children's Film Festival ukuze balethe izinhlelo eziyingqayizivele ebantwini abasha. UFidos Balbuya osebengungqa phambili ekuqinisekiseni ukuthi intsha iyafinyelela kwezamaciko impilo yakhe yonke. Naye esafunda isikole wake wabanjwa waboshwa ngenxa yokuthi wayeyisishoshovu esiphikisana nokuphatha kahulumeni wobandlululo.
Hi, my name is Firdaus Balbuya, an independent filmmaker producer from South Africa. I'm also the director of the Nelson Mandela Children's Film Festival. The festival started in 2018 as a direct result of a celebration of Tata Madiba's life and legacy. We wanted to use the film festival as an opportunity for both young people and older generations to learn about Madiba, but to do so through film. We think the medium of film and storytelling is an important platform, and that if we give our children the opportunity to tell stories, to understand how stories are produced, and to participate in their own storytelling, we would allow them to share their worlds, their voices, their views globally, as well as learn from other young people. It is also an opportunity for people who want to produce content for younger audiences to understand the ethics, the morality, the storytelling, the quality of content that should be produced for young people. We see it as an opportunity and a creation for those who are starting out in the medium of film, television, animation, gaming, to look at an audience that is really progressive, that is optimistic, that is in somewhat critical. And this audience would be able to assist us as we begin to tell new stories for a better country, for a global audience. My political awakening was in 1976 during the school boycotts, the 76 uprisings. I was only in Standard 6 at the time, and as an Indian child, I did not participate. But I was really completely engrossed in what was happening in our country. That was a time when, because of the apartheid policies, we didn't have television in South Africa. Television just kind of started. So there were no images of what was really taking place in Soweto. However, there were radio reports, and I remember trying to listen intently on what was happening. These were school children my age, who had decided to boycott school because of Afrikaans being a medium of instruction. This was not just saying, I don't want to learn Afrikaans. It was saying, we don't want to learn in Afrikaans, mathematics, science, geography. It was a deliberate understanding by young people that they needed to resist the apartheid atrocities and the apartheid education. I remember feeling completely disenfranchised. I felt like I needed to be part of what was happening. However, growing up in Fordsburg, in an Indian suburb, there wasn't that much discussion around what was taking place in Soweto.
Youth Arts documents and archives the hopes, aspirations, and dreams of young people. It courageously engages with their fears and frustrations. It echoes their resistance. Despite the incredible power of the arts to transform South African society, youth arts education is still not an integral part of South Africa's educational system. The Artfluencing Democracy Dialogues wishes to leave you with this question. If freedom of expression and freedom of creativity are enshrined principles in the South African Constitution, should an arts education which encourages free thinking and creativity not also be an integral part of every youth's education?
Thank you so much for joining us once again for another episode of the Artfluencing Democracy Dialogues. Till we meet again.